Our final speaker will be Matthew Brodsky, a geopolitical analyst and senior fellow at the Gold Institute for International Strategy. He previously was director of policy for the Jewish Policy Center. Matthew holds an MA in Middle East history from Tel Aviv University. He's a specialist in Middle East affairs and Arab politics. I'm sure you've frequently seen him on Fox News and other channels. He's a prolific writer, and his work has recently frequently appears in National Review, the Jerusalem Post, the National Interest, the Federalist, and the Hill, and he frequently appears on the Center's radio show, Secure Freedom Radio. Matthew?
Thank you, Fred, for hosting, and thank you to the Center for Security Policy. Very important issues and an excellent panel here to address it. So I'm going to be speaking about BDS. What is BDS? So in its simplest definition, of course, it's boycott, divest, and sanctions against Israel. Understanding its origins is fairly important. Many of its supporters claim that the movement began in July 2005 as a call by Palestinian civil society organizations for a boycott, divest, and sanction movement against Israel and for academic and cultural boycotts. The BDS architects also dated back to 2005 as a Palestinian-led movement for freedom, justice, and equality that intends to effectively challenge the international support for Israel, for Israeli apartheid and settler colonialism. Now, in this telling of the story, it was founded a year after the establishment of the Palestinian Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel in Ramallah. A great effort is taken to portray the movement as an indigenous Palestinian cause that's all about liberal philosophies, freedom, justice, equality, yada, yada, concepts that really resonate in a increasingly progressive West. In reality, the roots of the campaign predates the modern-day establishment of Israel as a state in 1948. By the end of 1945, 3 years before Israel's statehood and a few months after the last death camps in Europe was liberated, the newly formed Arab League Council formally declared a boycott against Jewish products and manufactured goods and called for all Arab institutions, organizations, merchants, commissioned agents, and individuals to refuse to deal in or distribute or consume Zionist products or manufactured goods. And you'll notice that Jewish and Zionist are used interchangeably there. The boycott actually remained in place for the duration of the 20th century, primarily conducted by Arab states until 2001, when a forum of non-governmental organizations was convened that year called the UN World Conference Against Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Related Intolerance. Try that as an acronym. In Durban, South Africa. This was a conference drenched in anti-Semitism. Copies of the anti-Semitic work protocols of the Elders of Zion, they were sold on the grounds. The forum's final declaration described Israel as a racist apartheid state that was guilty of racist crimes, including war crimes, acts of genocide, and ethnic cleansing. So this, of course, predates what the people who are now currently spokesmen in the Palestinian areas are wanting to portray. It promotes a policy of complete and total isolation of Israel as an apartheid state. This is the Durban strategy from 2001. The imposition of mandatory and comprehensive sanctions and embargoes, the full cessation of all links between all states and Israel. This conference is where the BDS movement, as we see it practiced today, was born. It seeks to link Israeli policies with the racial segregation practice of South Africa, as you can see there. The hope was to convince the international community to adopt the same type of boycott and sanctions campaign that contributed to the downfall of that system. Of course, given modern sensitivities, it wasn't considered to be against Jewish people, but against Zionists and Israeli settlers. So, contrary to the common BDS mythology, the first Palestinian BDS conference wasn't actually held until 2007 in Ramallah, giving birth to the BDS National Committee, comprised of a number of anti-Israel groups to serve as the Palestinian coordinating body for the global BDS campaign. So despite the disguise as a Palestinian human rights movement, the BDS movement was founded by left-wing socialists and Marxists in 2001, explicitly to undermine Israel's sovereignty, skillfully exploiting the languages of peace, justice, and human rights to appeal to Western audiences. So who comprises of the BDS movement, because it's not just a person or a simple idea. It's made up of a dozen NGOs and radical activists around the world. It includes rejectionist Palestinian groups in cooperation with radical left-wing groups in the West. BDS leaders and organizations are also linked to the Palestinian Authority and Palestinian student organizations. Well-funded Muslim organizations, most of whom have ties to the Muslim Brotherhood, such as the Council on American Islamic Relations and others. Other radical groups, terror-supporting organizations, in some cases, even terror groups themselves, such as Hamas. Of course, they're backed up with groups in the U.S., as you've heard already today. Anti-Israel Jewish groups, I should say, anti-Israel, Jewish groups, like J Street, individuals and left-wing students and academics. The ACLU, other liberal groups have joined with BDS advocates. Supporters obviously include politically here in the U.S., members of the Squad, prominently, of course, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, civil rights icon, Representative John Lewis of Georgia has actually joined in recently, Jewish Voice for Peace, Black Lives Matter. Frankly, the list is far too long to just to list here. But a lot of it gets back to the Western ideals, a play on progressive ideology. That's how it is basically disguised and masked here. A lot of these also have ties to the terrorist organizations. More than 30 Hamas and PFLP operatives hold senior position within BDS advocacy organizations. Known terrorists are invited to the national conventions of BDS affiliates. For more on all of this, you can read a report called Terrorists in Suits that Israel has put out, provides detailed evidence and more than 100 links between BDS and Hamas and PFLP people, both of whom are, of course, U.S. designated terrorist groups. So in Western circles, BDS is commonly understood, is commonly misunderstood. It is generally viewed as a progressive, non-violent campaign led by Palestinian grassroots organizations, propelled by Western human rights groups who call for boycotting Israeli goods produced in the occupied or disputed Golan Heights. But the BDS movement seeks to eliminate Israel even before addressing the Palestinian issue. The BDS movement isn't about registering dissatisfaction with Israeli policies. It's about applying a double standard to Israel. BDS is designed to demonize and delegitimize the Palestinian state and actually replace it with a Palestinian state. It does not simply object to Israel's administration of land it captured after Arab armies invaded the state in 1967. It opposes Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state in its pre-1967 borders. That's according to the movement's own official documents. The BDS lobby actually calls for a series of steps that would dismantle the Jewish state. So it's important to understand that the occupation that they refer to is not the 1967 occupation. It's the existence of Israel, the occupation of any land, Arab land, basically from the sea to the river to the sea. When they refer to the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 194, which recognizes Palestinian refugees, quote, right of return to their homes, there is no actual right that exists in international law. And its implementation in practice actually means the end of Israel as a democratic national state. Of course, they advocate the removal of the security barrier, which would make Israel the destination for weekly suicide terrorist attacks as it previously was. They also call for a phased demand. Actually, it's kind of based on the PLO platform for 1974, which is ending the occupation and colonization of all Arab lands and dismantling the wall, recognizing the fundamental rights of Arab Palestinian citizens to full equality, which they have, respecting and protecting and promoting Palestinian refugees to return to their homes through this resolution. And basically, this is the phased approach where you essentially take what you can get now and you continue to strive for the full enchilada, we should say, later. Now, what makes this anti-Semitic is if, for Javad Zarif always talks about how it's all about the B team. Well, when it comes to the modern features of anti-Semitism, it's all about the Ds, 3 Ds specifically: delegitimization, demonization, and double standards. So the standard definitions of anti-Semitism include denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination by claiming the existence of the State of Israel is a racist endeavor, applying double standards by requiring of it behavior that is not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, which is accepted by the EU and the State Department here, states that delegitimization, demonization, and the use of double standards toward Israel are modern-day forms of anti-Semitism. So, in context, there are 57 Muslim states, 24 Christian states, that's by law, there are actually over 100 if you're going by population, 6 Buddhist states, but only 1 Jewish state. There are presently about 124 countries that are involved with territorial disputes, the 1967 issue, for Israel, that is, many of which have produced much greater human suffering than that's involved between Israelis and Palestinians. But the BDS movement or platform singles out Israel and only Israel, and it's a campaign to end its existence, which is the world's Jewish states. So BDS is essentially turning anti-Semitism into a social movement. The fundamental truth is that, of course, we should say that not all of its supporters are anti-Semites. The movement itself is anti-Semitic, though, in its intent and in effect. It seeks to cut off the only Jewish state in the world from all international trade, diplomatic relations, cultural and academic programs, tourism, all other ties with every nation on earth. If fully implemented, it would destroy the state. And we should also close by saying that Israel has no problem with criticism. It's a very vibrant democratic state. In fact, they bash each other as well, if not better than we bash each other here in our political system. But what they reject is delegitimization, demonization, and the double standard. These are the features of modern anti-Semitism, and that's why the BDS movement is, to its core, an anti-Semitic platform.